This is a $100,000 survival challenge where a naked man and woman are dropped into a primal forest. With only one survival tool, they must survive 21 days and safely reach the extraction point. What awkward moments and exciting scenes will unfold? Let's wait and see. In Tanzania, Africa, daytime temperatures can rise above 40 degrees Celsius, and nights can be freezing cold. To survive, the man and woman here must continually face challenges, including lions, packs of hunting dogs, and various poisons, all deadly to humans. Now, two experienced survival experts have come to test their limits. EJ, 46, from North Carolina, is a 25-year Army veteran who has conducted survival missions worldwide. Kelly, 38, from Alaska, has served as the first hunting supervisor, and in her 12 years as a survival expert and adventurer, she has never made a mistake. Upon arrival, the first thing to do is to strip off all their clothes, meet as strangers completely naked, and face each other honestly, which is quite awkward. Then, they use a hug to ease the mood. After introductions, each person picks necessary survival tools from a bag on the ground. EJ chooses a dagger, a versatile tool for wilderness survival. Kelly picks a small pot for purifying water and cooking food. Additionally, each person receives a handheld camera to provide a first-person, immersive perspective. Lastly, the survival experts obtain a primitive map of the area marked with the escape route, about 8 kilometers west on a mountain. They must reach it within 21 days and light a signal fire to complete the survival task. EJ and Kelly's primary task is to reach a water point 5 kilometers north as quickly as possible. Since they have no shoes, they move slowly. By 10 a.m., the temperature is 33 degrees Celsius. They pass through a thorny bush area with umbrella-shaped acacia trees covered in 8-centimeter-long spikes, scattered across the field by the north wind. EJ presses the tall grass onto the first stumbling stone on the road to prevent the spikes from piercing too deeply. Meanwhile, Kelly hasn't forgotten to gather food. By noon, the temperature reaches 37 degrees Celsius. With the sun overhead and sharp thorns underfoot, they start to suffer from heat stroke. Dehydration could be deadly. 2 hours later, EJ finds a dried-up riverbed filled with animal feces, rendering the water undrinkable. However, Kelly is still happy as she takes a mud bath to moisturize her skin. Around 5 p.m., Kelly discovered a cave suitable for overnight shelter. However, they needed to find water first. After a few more steps, they finally reached the water point, relieving EJ's worries. They could survive, but the water wasn't safe to drink directly. It needed to be boiled to kill bacteria. EJ used primitive methods to start a fire, similar to friction fire starting, rubbing wood together to ignite dry grass. Kelly encouraged him, but they failed to start a fire until the third day. By then, dehydration had pushed their bodies to the limit. After a brief rest, EJ used his last bit of strength for fire making, with Kelly cheering him on. Eventually, the smoke from the dry grass grew thicker, and flames appeared. Kelly placed water in the pot over the fire to boil. A few minutes later, it was safe to drink. 950 milliliters per pot, with each adult needing about 25 pots. After living over 40 years, this was the best hot water EJ had ever tasted. By day 8, the thorns on the ground increasingly tormented EJ. He decided to make shoes using a knife to cut bark for soles and ropes to tie around his feet, resulting in a pair of leather sandals. After addressing their water and mobility issues, Kelly and EJ urgently needed protein. The African savanna was full of animals, but they were only capable of catching insects, which provided minimal nutrition. More seriously, their thorn injuries had begun to infect. If they didn't act quickly, they would fail. Seeing Kelly's spirits decline, EJ took her aside for a private talk away from the camera crew. He shared his thoughts on their situation, emphasizing the importance of staying spirited, ignoring useless things, controlling their temper, working closer together, and trusting each other to overcome difficulties. On day 13, as EJ's foot injury worsened, Kelly took the initiative to find food. Her target was a guinea fowl. While waiting for the right moment to hunt at night, a pack of hunting dogs forced her to abandon the hunting camp and wait for EJ. It was better to be hungry than to be eaten by dogs. The next day, they finally found food. Catfish from the bottom of a pond. Kelly caught the fish her way.
Fishy, I'm gonna come get you.
She's got her legs all spread out. That is one strange technique.
Woo! Fish in the crotch.
Kelly,
Yeah.
you're the better fisherman.
boosting her status in the team. Even without seasoning, EJ felt this meal was better and more delicious than any he had ever had. However, his foot injury worsened, rendering him immobile. They were still not out of their predicament when a rainstorm hit, and they didn't even have a shelter, making their situation even worse during the dry season. Kelly collected some charcoal in the cave to preserve the fire, leaving EJ to guard it while she went out to gather firewood. Seeing EJ's infected foot deteriorate, the cameraman suggested intervening with treatment. This didn't mean the challenge was over. If EJ could return after treatment, they still had a chance to complete the task. Medical staff cleaned the wound with disinfectant saline, squeezed pus from his arm wound, removed remaining thorn fragments, and used antibiotics. After getting a positive response from the doctor, they returned to camp. While resting, they suddenly heard noises. A mongoose had appeared nearby, solving their food problem for the second time since the catfish. EJ skinned it, and Kelly reminded him to avoid damaging the fur and to dry it, making a small pouch to wear for their departure. Although the small mongoose wasn't enough to fully satisfy their hunger, catching it was significant for the team. By the 20th day, they had only 1 day left to reach the rescue point. They needed to transfer the fire. EJ used branches and a small pot to make a basket, which he filled with charcoal. They had to cross desolate, hot land to keep the fire alive, their most difficult task yet. The journey was painful. Moving through bushes felt like torture. At night, they rested. In a critical error, EJ slept beside the fire and forgot to maintain it. Upon waking, only ashes remained. Fortunately, the charcoal was preserved. Some embers were placed on dry grass and blown on to reignite the flames. On the morning of the 21st day, they climbed to the rescue point summit and lit nearby kindling to signal a helicopter. After 21 days of ordeal, EJ had lost 14 kilograms and Kelly 13. Survival experts assessed their primitive survival rating, PSR. EJ scored 8.2 and Kelly 8.1, proving their expertise in wilderness survival. The scene shifts to the terrifying Amazon rainforest, home to the most diverse global biota. The waters here harbor caiman crocodiles and piranhas, while over 2 million insects crawl on the ground. The rainforest's most daunting aspect is its precipitation, with over 200 millimeters of rainfall annually, keeping it perpetually waterlogged. Jake, a handsome 36-year-old horse trainer with a passion for hunting and rich survival experience, openly identifies as gay, which means he has no messy thoughts about his partner. Jamie, also 36 and standing at 154 centimeters, has often been ridiculed for her height, but her tenacious character has won her accolades in various sports. She is also a wilderness paramedic. Upon arrival, the two stripped down, immediately attracted by each other's physiques. After brief pleasantries, they showed each other the survival tools they had brought. The humidity was so high that the production team had provided them with flint. Jake brought a machete, and awkwardly, so had Jamie. The duplication of survival gear posed a challenge. They consulted a map, which indicated they must cross a swamp, and then venture deep into the jungle to find a dry spot for camp. Without delay, they set off. By noon, they were blocked by a body of water that they needed to cross, which, terrifyingly, contained piranhas. After hesitating, they entered the water. Jamie was bitten by an unknown animal, but, fortunately, they crossed the lake safely. In the afternoon, they reached a large tree and agreed it was a suitable campsite. They immediately began cutting branches to build a shelter. By evening, their shelter was only partially complete, and they were plagued by insects. The next day, facing temperatures of 45 degrees Celsius and 83% humidity, they continued to improve the camp. Soon, they became thirsty. Without fire, they dared not drink from the water puddles. In the afternoon, Jake tried to start a fire, but the dampness prevented it. As rain began to fall, with no hope of making fire, they had no choice but to drink rainwater collected on leaves. By the third day, Jake noticed Jamie wasn't doing well because she had been shivering all night. She admitted it was due to lack of sleep. By noon, it started raining again. With no food, they had to drink water to stave off hunger. At night, the cold and hunger prevented them from sleeping, and Jamie began to break down emotionally, considering giving up. On the morning of the fourth day, Jamie's mood hadn't improved. Jake knew her quitting would greatly affect him too. He comforted her while continuously reinforcing their shelter to keep them warmer at night. It rained again that evening, causing Jamie's mood to deteriorate further. By the 5th day, after a sleepless night, Jamie chose to sleep in the shelter. Jake was busy collecting leaves and reinforcing the camp, knowing he needed to stabilize Jamie to succeed. The key was addressing the issues with insects and the cold. On the 7th day, Jake wanted to continue reinforcing the shelter but didn't want to wake Jamie, who spent the day picking only 6 leaves and doing little else, which frustrated Jake. Jamie admitted she didn't want to go out in the rain, as she feared getting cold. Ironically, she said this as Jake stood outside in the rain waiting for her. Unable to bear it any longer, Jake had a frank conversation with her. He directly told Jamie that despite knowing the shelter was cold, she wasn't trying to improve it, which he found unsatisfactory. Jamie responded that she felt her efforts were futile. After a candid talk, Jamie acknowledged her mistakes and began to work. Jake was relieved, and they even shared a kiss. On the morning of the 9th day, having only eaten some nuts, their energy was low. Jake ate some larvae he found under a tree, and Jamie started making a fishing cage using palm heart as bait. Despite his exhaustion, Jake set up some traps. At noon, Jake found a large palm tree with an edible heart. After much thought, he decided to cut it down and collected some to bring back to camp, which they shared. By the 10th day, they needed to make a fire, as they couldn't eat any caught animals otherwise. Making fire was extremely difficult due to the damp conditions. They gathered some tinder and chased the sunlight to dry it before trying to start a fire. Fortunately, their efforts paid off, and they managed to light a fire. In the evening, Jake decided to go hunting, using the faint light from the camera to find food, but it was too dark to see anything. On the 11th day, they each checked their traps, which were empty. It started raining again that night, and the rain continued for 4 days, reaching the 15th day. Their physical strength was at its limit, and they even started showing symptoms of hypoglycemia, with Jake experiencing intermittent fainting. They looked at the map and saw their evacuation point was in water, a habitat for piranhas and crocodiles. They felt it was necessary to start building a raft. Hungry, Jake began chopping trees and spent a whole day felling a large one. By the 16th day, Jake was severely physically drained, but he continued building the raft. Jamie, worried about Jake's condition, did what she could and even fed him insects, knowing his exhaustion was far worse than hers. On day 17 in the afternoon, Jake couldn't hold on any longer and returned to the camp. He wanted to lie down and rest. By noon on day 18, Jake still hadn't gotten up. Seeing his exhausted appearance, Jamie couldn't bear it, so she decided to look for food a bit further from the camp. However, she was bitten by a swarm of ants as soon as she left. At noon, Jamie unexpectedly found a wax apple tree, which delighted her. She picked some from the ground and brought them back to the camp. Jake felt it wasn't enough after eating, so they decided to go back to the tree to pick more. They cooperated and picked many wax apples. By day 20, having replenished their energy, they continued building a wooden boat. After completing it, they began testing it in the water. Many ants crawled out from the tree. Upon reaching the shore, Jake found a huge spider which he quickly killed and roasted over the fire. Although it didn't taste great, it was still a meaty dinner. On day 21, their day of evacuation, the map showed they had to avoid numerous water pythons and various piranhas, then follow the river to reach the evacuation point. It started raining at noon, and their raft got stuck, but they managed to free it after much effort. Afterwards, things went relatively smoothly. After sliding into a wider body of water, they finally saw the rescue boat. The two successfully completed their Amazon challenge. Jake lost 34 kilograms, and Jamie lost 18 kilograms. Despite the initial heavy rain and hunger nearly breaking her spirit, Jamie eventually rallied and succeeded in the challenge. The next contestant, Tawny, was abandoned by her parents at 16 and is now a single mother. Childhood traumas have left her with a severe lack of security. Another contestant, Julio, 28, was raised by his father to participate in this competition to make him proud. After arriving, they both stripped down and met in a clearing, engaging in awkward conversation while admiring each other's bodies. They are in Florida's Seminole Jungle, home to nearly 4-meter-long alligators, the world's largest deadly rattlesnakes, and 400-pound black bears. With the rainy season upon them, they also face giant mosquitoes. On the first afternoon, they headed towards the camping site, encountering various spiders along the way, which Julio was not afraid of at all. That afternoon, they crossed a river, risking crocodile attacks. After crossing, they began building a shelter. That night, they heard noises but dared not go out to see what it was. The next morning, they started looking for food. Julio found a rattlesnake, killed it with a stick, and brought it back to camp. While skinning it, they also found some snake eggs and immediately boiled them.
That's so good.
Snake eggs taste identical to hard-boiled eggs. The actual sustenance that you get from a rattlesnake isn't a lot.
That's actually really good.
But it's a small victory for us.
It rained in the afternoon and their fire went out. After reinforcing the shelter, they tried to start a fire again, but failed due to the dampness. On the third day, Julio's condition worsened. He caught a lizard but couldn't bring himself to kill it and cried alone.
And I like this guy. I really don't want to kill him. I've killed animals before, but it's just, I'll do it to survive.
He was still crying by evening. By the fourth day, due to the lack of food, Julio's emotions began to crumble. In the afternoon, Tawny started looking for food. She caught some small sardines to make kebabs. Just then, she spotted a crocodile in the water and quickly called Julio over. Facing this 2-meter-long creature, they had no good options. After returning, they roasted the small fish, but Julio said he had no appetite and didn't want to eat anything. On the fifth day, Tawny caught a lizard. He wanted to share it with Julio, but Julio refused to eat it. Julio's mood also started to turn strange. Tawny decided to talk to him, which made Julio cry and express a desire to quit. Eventually, Julio did quit. Tawny felt abandoned again, but decided to continue the challenge alone. That night, Tawny was nearly devoured by mosquitoes. On the 6th morning, she found herself covered in mosquito bites, but remained determined to continue her challenge. By the 8th day, Tawny went out for food and found an otter, then took the fish the otter had left on the shore and cooked it.
But at this point, this is the luckiest day I've had out here so far. This meal alone is more meat than all of the little meals I've had out here combined. It couldn't have happened at a better time.
On the 11th day, the weather turned gloomy, and Tawny had to stay in her shelter. By the 13th day, she struggled with the conditions and began to miss her daughter. By the 14th day, while looking for food, Tawny found fresh bear feces near the camp, which scared her. That night, she clearly heard a black bear nearby, which kept her awake. By the 18th day, Tawny's physical strength was faltering, and her shelter was accidentally burned down by the fire. On the 19th day, she rebuilt her shelter. By the 21st day, the day of her departure, the map showed she had to cross dense jungle to reach a clearing 5 kilometers away, where a vehicle would pick her up. At noon, she realized she was completely lost, which was disheartening. After a brief rest, she resumed her journey and reached her destination in the afternoon, successfully completing the challenge. Over 21 days, Tawny lost 18 kilos and finished the challenge through sheer perseverance. The scene shifts to the deep jungles of northern Colombia, home to a terrifying canyon. The rugged mountain path can only be accessed on foot or by horse. This area is also home to dangerous creatures like the jaguar, blood-sucking ticks, and the world's most poisonous spider, the banana spider. This spider is deadly. A bite can cause asphyxiation within minutes. This episode features David, a 36-year-old adventurer and skilled flute player with a strong physique from practicing yoga. Also appearing is Kayla, a young blacksmith in her 20s, who joins the show to prove her strength to her daughter. As usual, upon arrival, they strip off their clothes. After meeting in a valley, they awkwardly chat and then show the only survival tools they brought. David has a bow drill for making fire, and Kayla brings a small knife she forged herself. After studying the map, they set off to establish a campsite. David, happy to see Kayla, is talkative and even hums a tune along the way. They pass a small pond and take a dip together. By the afternoon, they find a relatively flat area and decide to set up camp there. Without wasting time, they begin building their shelter. Kayla cuts trees while David handles other tasks. They work all afternoon but fail to finish the shelter before dark. That night, Kayla wakes up cold and David suggests they hug each other for warmth, but she shyly declines. In the middle of the night, they are awoken by animal sounds and spot a jaguar staring at them. The next morning, they quickly work on their shelter to get off the ground as soon as possible. Fortunately, they manage to elevate themselves before dark, but the roof remains unfinished, leaving them cold throughout the night. On the third day, David was still troubled about why Kayla wouldn't let him hold her while sleeping. Kayla jokingly said he had ticks on him. Then, they began to build a shelter. After finishing the roof, David suddenly became unhappy. They even argued that night because Kayla wouldn't let David hold her while sleeping. By the fourth day, David thought he might have been too hasty. He picked a ripe mango to cheer Kayla up, and she gladly accepted his offering. That evening, Kayla captured footage of a mysterious animal with the camera, but David couldn't find it when he looked. On the 8th day, which was David's birthday, Kayla gave him a mysterious gift. It turned out to be a headband, which David happily wore. David then started making traps to catch prey, since they had only caught a few crabs and lacked protein. At night, Kayla heard the sound of a stone falling. David quickly checked the traps but found nothing. By the 10th day, they found a snake while searching for food and killed it together. Back at camp, they roasted it over a fire. That night, Kayla began to have stomach problems and threw up. On the 11th day, David's tick bite started to get infected. The production team had to call a doctor to clean his wound to prevent sepsis. The doctor drained pus from the wound and bandaged it simply. Over the next 4 days, they stayed in camp, eating wild plants and animals and trying to heal the wound while conserving energy for their departure. By the 20th day, they began to prepare for evacuation. Because it was a long distance, they had to leave that day. They needed to cross cliffs, walk down beside a waterfall to the valley, and camp there overnight. Afterwards, they built a raft to float 8 kilometers downriver to the evacuation point. In the afternoon, they reached a banana grove and started making the raft. After finishing, they set up camp. At that moment, they killed a banana spider. At 10 p.m., David was hit in the face by a seed, causing him great pain. On the 21st day, they put the bamboo raft in the water and slid down the river. By the afternoon, they finally reached the sea and completed their challenge. After 21 days, David had lost 14 pounds and Kayla 12 pounds. It must be said, they were quite a match. This brings us to our location in Europe, Croatia, in a wild wetland called Kopaki Rit. This place is home to hundreds of terrifying mosquitoes, wild boars with tusks ready to attack unwelcome guests during the day, and packs of wolves hunting at night. In such a frightening place, today welcome 2 challengers. The first, a handsome man named Lee, is 33 years old from Australia, but grew up in London, skilled in hunting. Tragically widowed in midlife, he and his 3-year-old daughter depend on each other. He joined this show to prove his strength to his daughter. His partner, Stacy, is a 35-year-old punk musician from Idaho, USA. Having survived in the desert, she joined the show to prove her limits to her child. Upon arrival, they began by taking off their clothes. Stacy plainly stated that humans are animals too, so being naked was normal. They both felt embarrassed and giggled, unable to speak at first. Then they started studying the map and set off after identifying a suitable camping spot. The weather was hot. To prevent dehydration, they covered themselves in mud. Along the way, they found many jackal footprints. After crossing a patch of grass, they reached a small river. Though not very clear, boiling the water could solve their drinking problem. They decided to camp there. The first task was to make fire for boiling water. Despite the dry weather, making fire was challenging due to technical difficulties. Lee's palms were raw from the effort, discouraging both of them. Without fire, they couldn't drink water. Lee suggested not making a fire, using leaves for shade, and burying themselves in sand to sleep. Reluctantly, Stacy agreed. At night, they heard distant wolf howls and were tormented by mosquitoes, making sleep impossible. They chatted instead. Talking about his wife made Lee cry. They stayed up until dawn. The next day, they faced dehydration if they didn't replenish their fluids, so making fire became the priority. Eventually, their efforts paid off, and they managed to start a fire. After hydrating, they began looking for food. On the 3rd day, Lee set up fish traps in the river. On the 4th day, he caught a small fish. Though not filling, they were happy. Lee prepared a fish soup. During this, the pot overturned, scalding Stacy. The crew intervened, and after examination, her third-degree burns required her to consider quitting due to the risk of sepsis without proper hygiene. Lee felt guilty, but Stacy decided to continue, which delighted Lee. At night, wolf howls close by woke them up. On the 5th day, Stacy, in pain, was in a terrible mood and desperately wanted food. Lee found a large fish in the trap, and they enjoyed fresh fish soup.
Oh, wow. It tastes like it's fit for the gods. Ow.
However, by the 7th day, Stacy's wounds hadn't improved. On the 8th day, unable to bear the pain, she called the crew again. The doctor said her wound had become infected. If she continued, she risked fever and spreading infection. Stacy had to quit. Alone, Lee cried at night. Over the following days, he lost motivation but became desperate for food by the 10th day. He tried to catch a fish but failed. By the 12th day, with less food available, his condition worsened, and he considered giving up. On the 13th day, lacking nutrition, his body started consuming its cells, causing anxiety. He ate little over the next few days. By the 18th day, Lee was using his last energy reserves and cried again. On the 20th day, Lee gained resolve. On the 21st day, his evacuation day, he burned the camp and headed to the evacuation point. Following the river to a red marker on the map, he reached the evacuation point in the afternoon, risking fainting as he swam to the rescue boat. Lee successfully completed the challenge, losing 16 pounds due to insufficient protein intake, but his strong willpower helped him overcome mental challenges and complete the task. After watching many survival experts' challenges, the production team decided to try something different this time. They planned to randomly select a team from a large pool of fans to participate in the challenge. After a series of steps including registration and voting, 2 challengers were finally selected to undertake a 14-day wilderness survival challenge. The first to appear was Kristen, a 32-year-old oncology nurse and mother of 2. She felt fortunate to be chosen by the production team and was determined to give her all in the upcoming challenge. Next up was Paulo, a handsome 26-year-old who loves adventures. He was confident about participating in the show. For safety, the team provided them with basic survival training a month before departure, including making bird cages, starting fires, building shelters, and setting traps. Their challenge location was deep in Somoto Canyon, Nicaragua, in a dense jungle filled with numerous poisonous plants and animals. Each arrived by car at their respective starting points and began by removing their clothes. They met deep in the jungle and engaged in awkward conversation, then displayed the survival tools they brought. Apart from the machetes provided by the team, Paulo uniquely brought a spool of fishing line. They studied the map, discussed a route, and set off immediately. Along the way, Paulo kept asking Kristen about her professional skills, fearing she might be just a pretty face. The journey was tough, and Paulo accidentally cut his leg. In the afternoon, they reached a beautiful waterfall and found a large tree, deciding to camp there. Paulo tied the fishing line to the tree and added leaves to make a simple shelter. They were excited when they first lay down at night, but by midnight, their eyes were wide open due to the sound of footsteps from a large mammal. Early the next morning, Paulo started making a spear, shaken by the unknown animal from the night before. After finishing the spear, he attempted to start a fire, but despite having a fire starter, they were unable to ignite it until the afternoon. Thirsty, they decided to check the waterfall. Paulo drank directly from it without concern for cleanliness, while Kristen hesitated and ultimately did not drink. She then caught a small frog, hoping for dinner, but accidentally let Paulo scare it away. At night, Paulo encouraged Kristen to drink the raw water, but she refused. By the 3rd morning, Kristen, driven by extreme thirst and orange urine, finally compromised and drank the raw water. On the 4th day, they still hadn't managed to start a fire, and Kristen's back was covered in mosquito bites. They tried again and successfully lit a fire this time. Later, Paulo started looking for crabs under the waterfall and encountered a coral snake. Ignoring the danger, he pinned the snake by its head with a stick, and after much effort, brought it back to camp, where they roasted and ate the snake. On the 6th day, they began making cage-like tools, but their clumsy efforts were unsuccessful. By the 7th day, tensions arose. Paolo accused Kristen of doing nothing, not wanting to shoulder all the work alone. Meanwhile, Kristen hummed a tune and wandered around, which only increased Paolo's resentment. Back at camp, Paolo decided to talk to Kristen. He expressed his dissatisfaction, but Kristen said nothing. By day 9, they still hadn't found any food. Kristen decided to surprise Paolo by making a bird cage. After she finished, she gave it to Paolo and their relationship improved. On day 11, Kristen found some thorny plants and used them as bait in a trap. Paolo spotted a lizard, but despite hitting it with a stick, it escaped. On day 12, Paolo mentioned he hadn't been able to use the bathroom for 5 days due to lack of food, and then fainted. By day 13, while checking the traps, they unexpectedly caught a bird, which they cooked and ate that evening.
Good.
Oh my gosh.
On day 14, the day of their departure, the map showed their extraction point was on top of a mountain. They faced a series of steep slopes before finally reaching the vehicles that afternoon. The pair successfully completed the challenge. Over 15 days, Paolo lost 32 kilograms, and Kristen lost 10 kilograms. They became the only pair so far to succeed in this camping challenge.